Good afternoon. My name is Nikki Ashton. I'm the MP for Churchill, Kuwait, Nokoski, and the fairness critic for the NDP. We know that Canadians are struggling through an inflation crisis where the cost of groceries and basic necessities are out of control. A cost of living crisis we haven't seen in over a generation. Meanwhile, it's tax season and people are rushing to get their taxes in to avoid fines. Canadians overwhelmingly play by the rules and expect everyone to do the same. But the sad reality is that there are different rules for Canadians, hardworking Canadians, people on fixed incomes, and for billionaire tax cheats, on the other hand. What better proof than how this government dealt with Canadians like the ones in my constituency who applied for CERB payments during a public health emergency and were later found to be ineligible? Many of the people that I represent live in communities with high rates of unemployment, reliant on social assistance, and they believed that CERB payments were there to help all of us during a difficult time, only to find out now that the government is vigorously clawing that money back. The reality is that the federal government has already clawed back more than $3.2 billion from Canadians who access CERB. Yet following the leaks about billionaire tax cheats in the Panama Paradise and Pandora Papers, nothing has changed. We know that 900 Canadian individuals, trusts, and foundations were mentioned in the Panama Papers. In the Paradise Papers, it was 3,300, and the Pandora Papers, 500. Due to the order paper question we filed recently, we also know that out of those numbers, the CRA only had 5 criminal investigations. We also know that the CRA only levied $62.5 million in assessment and fines, and there was not one single prosecution. We know that the government likes to keep their head in the sand and pretend this isn't a problem, so we decided to make a little graph. People may be wondering why the number of Canadian individuals, trusts, and foundation numbers is so big, yet the prosecution number is so small. In fact, if you notice on the graph, there isn't a line for prosecutions because that number is 0. Our message to the government is clear. If billionaires are using tax havens to rob Canadians of the funding we need for the services we rely on, we must close those tax havens. If billionaires are cheating Canadians, billionaires should be prosecuted. If the laws are insufficient, which they are, they should be changed. I want to acknowledge the work of Canadians for Tax Fairness, and I'm so pleased that Dr. D.T. Cochrane from the Canadians for Tax Fairness is here with us today. They, like others, Oxfam, the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, have been clear the system is broken, and it is hardworking Canadians and Canadians on fixed incomes who are paying the price. To point out, the number collected from the CRA is $13.5 million less than the last time we filed this order paper question when it comes to tax loopholes, suggesting that the loopholes are so big that even when CRA identifies unreported taxes, people using tax havens are still able to get them reversed. That's why today we're calling on the government to close these tax havens. At a bare minimum, we should be looking at these double non-taxation agreements Canada has with over 80 countries, which often prevent companies from being taxed in either Canada or the other jurisdiction. Canadian assets in the top 16 tax haven jurisdictions have now conservatively exceeded $400 billion. That number has increased by $126 billion since the early days of Justin Trudeau's government. It's clear that this government is happiest when billionaires get out of paying their fair share. It is time for that to change. Canadians deserve better. I now want to turn the mic over to Dr. D.T. Cochrane from Canadians for Tax Fairness.
Thank you very much, Nikki. Good afternoon, everyone. As we are in tax season, it's crucial to examine the government's approach to taxation and whether or not it is living up to a professed commitment to tax fairness. Unfortunately, the government's failure to acknowledge the connection between record corporate profits and inflation, which has created financial stress for most Canadians, has created a huge tax fairness blind spot. During the pandemic, the federal government used its financial resources to provide unprecedented support for Canadians, injecting almost $500 billion extra dollars into the economy. Now, those dollars are being blamed for inflation. But this overlooks the much simpler source of inflation, corporate price hikes. Much of the government's pandemic support spending was funneled through corporations. CEWS was the single largest transfer of public money into private hands in Canadian history. Yet a lack of accountability and transparency measures means it remains unclear if this spending achieved its goal or simply helped drive corporate profits higher. In the decade before the pandemic, Canadian corporations claimed about 8 cents of every dollar as pre-tax profit. In 2021, they claimed over 12 cents. The largest corporations took almost 16 cents out of every dollar. And data for 2022 indicates profit margins remained elevated. By hiking prices, corporations were able to claim a large portion of the money used to support Canadians. And what has since happened to that money? Half of 2021 profits were distributed to owners as dividends and share buybacks. Another quarter of the funds were used for acquisitions of other businesses, which creates more corporate concentration. Meanwhile, net investment by the largest non-financial corporations was at its lowest level since 2003, and Canadian corporations paid their lowest income taxes as a share of profit since at least 1999. But instead of trying to get some of this public money back under public control, the government is going after CERB recipients. Along with the failure to prosecute anyone named in the Panama Papers and other high-profile leaks, it is just another reminder that the ultra-wealthy do not play by the same rules as the rest of us. A more honest appraisal of where public money has gone and how it got there should lead the government to bring more fairness into the tax system. For example, an excess profits tax could return billions to the public, creating more fiscal space for the government to support Canadians in ways that would alleviate the financial strain created by corporate-driven inflation. Before I finish, I just want to call attention to a concerning aspect of the government's plans for climate action introduced in Budget 2023. The government is making its largest climate action spending commitment to date, which is undeniably good. Unfortunately, most of this spending is through tax credits, which risks becoming yet another loophole that gives public money to powerful corporations. Given what we learned with CEWS, it is imperative that these tax credits include strong transparency and accountability measures to ensure that Canadians are actually benefiting from this spending. And if we're going to task the CRA with assessing qualifications for these credits, then it must be provided with the necessary resources. Let us all remember the importance of holding our government accountable for its revenue collection and spending decisions. The use of public money must be done transparently, and taxes must be allocated fairly. Only then can we work together towards a more equitable and sustainable future for all Canadians. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cochrane, and I want to acknowledge once again the leading voice that is Canadians for Tax Fairness when it comes to dealing with the clearly increasingly unfair tax system in our country that we're seeing from federal governments that prioritize the interests and the profits of the billionaire class versus standing up for working people and people on fixed incomes who are hurting right now.